Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's meetup. I would like to apologize for what happened in the last event. We couldn't host it on time to unforeseen circumstances. Thank you for supporting us and joining us today. And this meetup is part of the .NET Foundation, and you could join us here in Pittsburgh.NET user group, and I have the social links available. And let's get into today's topic. We're going to talk about level up your DevOps with the GitHub Actions. The agenda is going to be more like deploying your content. Are you looking to rapidly deploy your content using this Docker containers the future? And then we have Rob Rich with us today, and he's going to do a live demo on the Docker and getting that lined up and deploying it into Kubernetes. I would like to extend my warm welcome to Rob. Thank you for joining us today.
Most definitely. It's so great to be here. I'm so excited to do this topic. This is so much fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Rob. Over to you.
Yeah. Awesome. So today we're going to build a DevOps pipeline live on stage. We'll build a DevOps pipeline with containers, so that'll be fun to see. We'll use GitHub Actions to do the things. And here's the part where I tell you, I am definitely going to post the slides on my site tonight. But in this talk, there are no slides. So let's pull up the code. Can you see my screen? Here's the project that we'll work with. So it's a GitHub repository, and it's pretty well empty. I did set a few things. I've got some settings set, but we're going to build all of this code live on stage. So let's do it. I've got here an empty repository, empty folder. I've got nothing in my Kubernetes cluster. And so let's build a website. Now we could build our website in lots of things, but let's say .NET new. .NET's a pretty good way to build a website. And so we can say .NET new and then specify the type of site we want. So let's say .NET new MVC. I'm going to give it a name of level up DevOps and an output folder of dot. Now both name and output are optional. If I chose not to include these, then it would create a folder inside the folder that I am, matching the folder that I am. So my project would be named demo, and it would be inside the demo folder. So I want to call it level up DevOps and put it in this folder instead. So now let's open that up in VS Code. And the cool part is this is a full website. We could have definitely built this and group. So let me go grab. So now run, and that would be great for being able to start our app locally. But when we want to build it, we probably want to do different things. Let's say .NET build. We'll want to build in release mode. And then we could say .NET test. We'll also test in release mode to make sure that we don't have a debug build and a release build. Then we'll say .NET publish. And we'll do this in release mode. And we can do it to a, let's say, dist folder. These are all the commands that we will run on the command line to be able to build our website. Well, let's do this inside of containers. Oh, yes, thanks, VS Code. VS Code is going to build us this .vs Code folder. This is great for debugging our app. And so our first step in containerizing our application is to build a gitignore file. So let's talk about best practices with .gitignore. Now, there's a bunch of sections here in our gitignore file that we want to ignore. We want to ignore our bin and obj, probably star.tmp, star.log. Let's take a look at what we might choose to ignore and get a little bit more methodical about this. Well, we want to ignore these categories. Built files, checking those in would increase the size of our repository. We definitely don't want to do that. Downloaded files, we don't want to download libraries and then check them in because that will also increase the size of our repository. Temp files, user-specific files, and there we go. Thank you, GitHub Copilot. And also temp files. These are the types of files that we don't want to commit into our source control. So first, built files. Bin and obj, we definitely don't want those in our source control repository. Downloaded files. If we were in a Node project, we'd have Node modules. If we were in a Python project, we'd have our py cache. In a .NET Framework app, we would have the packages folder. But here in a .NET 7 project, we don't have any of those. So we don't have anything in the downloaded files section. Excellent. Temp files. Well, yeah, star.tmp, maybe star.log, maybe star.orig. These are all files that we don't want to commit because, well, they're not really part of our app. We just want to have them as temporary files that we might do. Next, user-specific files. Now, the .vs folder definitely falls into this category. We're not in Visual Studio, we're in VS Code, so maybe the .vs code directory matches this. Now, it depends. Do we have any customizations in our build? In this case, I'll say yes. Other user-specific files, star.user. If we end up with a level up devops.csproj.user, we definitely don't want to commit that. And then, oh, this one is secrets. Towards secrets, we don't want to include a .env file, or to that end, star.env. If we had any secrets that way, we might choose to keep secrets here in app settings JSON, or maybe app settings.development.json. You know, maybe we have, for example, a connection string here. So let's say connection strings and my DB, and it would be easy to put secrets here, but we don't want secrets here. Instead, let's say use user secrets. Perfect. Now, if we are using user secrets, that means that this file will end up inside of our user profile. Now I happen to have this extension here, user secrets. And because I've got this .NET Core user secrets extension, I can come back in here to my csproj and I can say, manage user secrets. Yes, I would like you to add the user secrets thing. And now we have a secrets.json that is definitely not in our user profile directory. So, yep, we definitely want to put our connection strings here. And now we'll have my DB. And this is where the actual database will be. Maybe it's a local database, the database name, other details associated with this connection can be there. Now, one thing that's kind of interesting about this is it adds this line into our csproj user secret ID. And this could be anything. So let's say level up DevOps. It just needs to be a unique string. It doesn't need to be a GUID. And if we close this, we'll get a different secrets file. But now, yep, I've set my secrets previously, and this is the one here in my user profile directory. Perfect. So we've chosen not to put user secrets in this file. So I think we're okay not excluding this. Now we might choose to exclude app settings.development.json, but I'm even going to say, let's go grab this and set it in place here just so that we know that we want to use user secrets. We don't want secrets in our config files here. Perfect. We've got a git ignore file. Now we very specifically ignored those things. Built files, downloaded files, temp files, user-specific files, and secrets. And all of the things specific to our project. If we were in a Node project, those would be different files. If we were in a Python project, they'd be different files. But we definitely want to exclude those 5 sets of files from our Git repository. Now we want to containerize this. We started out with our .gitignore file. Let's close to the right. Now, how might we include this inside of a container? Well, our first section is to create a .dockerignore file. Now, a Dockerignore file has almost exactly the same syntax as our gitignore file. Perfect. So let's start with our gitignore file, and let's set that in place in our Dockerignore file. But there's one more section that we want to add to our Dockerignore file, and this is non-production files. Okay, so we have our, pardon me, we have our app settings.development.json. Let's add that. App settings.development.json. We also have here in properties this launch settings JSON, which is all of the details that we would need to start it in IIS or run it locally. We definitely don't want that in our production container. So we'll say launch settings.json. And what's different about a Dockerignore file from a gitignore file is in a gitignore file, we would look recursively in every directory. In a Dockerignore file, we don't. So let's specifically look for this in any directory. We could specifically say it's in the properties directory, but let's just go grab it that way. And to that end, if we had multiple projects, we might want to do this in all the directories where we can say any bin directory, any obj directory. If we wanted to go nuts, we could also say the debug folder and the release folder, and that would be fine as well. In this case, let's go simpler. Cool. We have our .dockerignore file. Now, the cool part about this Dockerignore file is that these files will never end up in our container. Even if we wanted to, that could be bad. So we want to, hopefully that'll save you the hour that I spent trying to figure it out. If we want to copy a file that is one of these files into our container, we very specifically need to first remove it here. But now that we've got our .dockerignore file, our next step is a Dockerfile. Now, a Dockerfile is the configuration as code that helps us understand how we need to build up this image. What are the steps that we need to take to get from our source code to a container running inside of Kubernetes? Now, there's 4 main things here in a Dockerfile. There's from, copy, run, and CMD. Now we're going to see other commands today, and there are many more, but these 4 commands are the key commands inside of a Dockerfile. If you're familiar with these 4 commands, you can read and write most Dockerfiles. We'll play with a few more today, but these are the critical ones. CMD, this will run as the container starts up, and all the rest of these will run at build time. Okay, from. Now let's start with let's head off to Docker Hub. We will search for .NET here, and we'll land on this meta repository that starts talking about the various repositories where we can get a base image. And let's start with a base image that has just enough to get us where we need to go, but not too much. .NET samples. This is a great example of lots of different Docker files that can do interesting things. Monitor, we could use this to be able to monitor our .NET apps and maybe push these, push the logs to OpenTelemetry or maybe Prometheus and Grafana. Runtime deps is everything that we would need to install .NET, but .NET is not installed yet. Built on top of that is runtime. This allows us to be able to run console apps, but not run websites. Built on top of that is ASP.NET that allows us to be able to run websites, but not build our app. And then built on top of that is SDK that allows us to be able to build .NET apps. So let's start here. We want to start with the build tools, the .NET SDK. So popping this open, we can see that here is the base image that we want to start with. And we can pick the particular version of .NET that we have. Scrolling down a little bit, we can see the various additions. So 7.0 is the one that was there. We could also refer to it as latest. and that uses Debian 11. Alpine is actually a super small version of Linux. It's 50 megs or so. So if we start with Alpine as our base image, then our production runtime container will be significantly smaller. So instead of 7.0, let's use the 7.0-Alpine tag. Okay, back here in our Dockerfile from this -Alpine, and now we have our build tools here in our image, so we can start to build on top of this to do what we need to do. Next, let's copy everything from the directory where we'll run our Docker build command to the directory inside of our image. So there's a space here. So what is that directory that we want to copy it to? Well, let's set that. Let's set workdir to /src. Now this could be anything. We could say var lib foo bar, and it will recursively create and then cd into those directories. But in this case, src is fine. Now we're going to copy all of the files, all of these files, except for those files we've chosen to ignore here, into that source directory. Now that we've got the build tools, our next step is to be able to run it. So we saw all of these commands that we need to run. Those are the commands that we would run from the console. Let's enumerate those again. .NET restore, that will restore all of our NuGet packages. .NET build, let's build in release mode. .NET test will run all of our unit tests. We'll also do that in release mode so we don't end up with one release build and one debug build. .NET publish. We'll do that in release mode, and we'll go to the dist folder. Now we could go anywhere, but that dist folder seems like a good spot to put this. This is not that unlike right-click publish inside of Visual Studio. All of those files that we would need to publish to IIS. In this case, we're going to host with Kestrel, but it'll still do that collection process. Collect all the DLLs, collect all of the images, JavaScript, CSS files, but we'll leave the C# files behind. We don't need those. Excellent. So these are the console commands that we would run to be able to do these processes, and we want to turn them into Docker commands. So let's do that. Let's run this. We will run this and this and this. Now we've run all of those as Docker commands. Excellent. With each step, it will do this thing. And then if it passes, it'll automatically do the next one. So if we have a failing unit test, or if our build fails, then we won't ever get to the publish step. We'll never get a production image. And so we will never have a production image where the build fails or unit tests fail. Excellent. Next up, we want to start this up. And so let's say .NET and level up DevOps.dll. And that, by the way, is now in the dist directory. Excellent. Now there are a couple more environment variables that we want to set here. Let's set the ASP.NET Core environment to production. Let's tell it that we're going to start on port 80. And then let's expose port 80. That gives us some metadata that others might attach to understand the types of ports that this web server is expecting. Cool. We have a Dockerfile, and we could use this in production today. This would be great. But there's some best practices that we can improve on in this Dockerfile. One of the big best practices is we should never have build tools in our production runtime container. Now, we don't want our build tools because we don't want, for example, someone to be able to crack our container, upload their own source code, and start up their own web server. So we really want just the runtime. Now, we still want to build inside the container so that we're in a neutral environment. So let's head back over to Docker Hub, and we'll pop open the ASP.NET registry. Cool. So here we can see that here's our base image that we want to use. And scrolling down a little bit, we can see that there is an Alpine version of it. So let's use 7.0-Alpine. Back here in our Dockerfile, let's split this Dockerfile in two. Let's say from this Alpine. Now we have two phases in our Dockerfile. This one will be our build server image, and I put server in air quotes. It's not a server, it's a container, but we can kind of think of it as a build server. And here is our production runtime server image. Excellent. Now, we do need to tidy up a few things because, for example, our content isn't in the dist directory anymore. Let's change this to app. And now we want to copy the content from the dist folder into the current folder. Well, wait a minute. This dist folder, if we did this command, would look for a dist folder out here. We definitely don't have that content here. We want to pull it from over here. So let's say from equals build, and we'll name this build stage, and we'll name this one as build. Now we could definitely also say this one is as prod, or as final, or whatever we wanted to do, but nah. Let's just say this one is as build. Now we'll go look in that build stage. We'll look for the dist directory, and we'll copy all of that content here into this directory so that we can start it up. We now have one that has the build tools and one that doesn't. That's great. We've leveraged some Dockerfile best practices to ensure that our production container is as lean as possible and does not include build tools. Perfect. There's one more thing that we can do to tidy up this Dockerfile. Right now, we're .NET restoring, and then we're building and testing and publishing. Each one of these commands will create a separate Docker layer. And Docker will cache it automatically, which is perfect. But that means if I come in here and I come to, say, a JavaScript file and I change it, or I just change a CSS file, I've invalidated this layer. So then Docker will restore my NuGet packages. That might be a little burdensome. The slowest part of this process is probably this .NET restore. So really, I want to do something a little different. I would like to restore first, and then copy, and then build, test, and publish. Now, if I only change a CSS file or JavaScript file, I won't invalidate the NuGet packages that I've restored. I will only invalidate these ones. I'll still get a clean build, but the build will be faster because this one is cached. Now, I still need to tell it where my manifest is, what NuGet packages do I need to download. So let me, oops. Let's copy level up DevOps.cs proj into the current directory. So now we have our manifest, all of the NuGet packages we need to download. Then we'll restore our NuGet packages, caching that layer. Then we'll copy everything. Then we'll build, test, and publish. Now, if I change a CSS file or JavaScript file or even a C# file, it will invalidate this layer and it won't need to restore my NuGet packages. That can make local builds faster. Excellent. So we've got a Dockerfile here. Now we could definitely expand this further, but I think this is a good stopping point here for this Dockerfile. Next up, we want to get this into Kubernetes. So let's go reach into here. Let's create a new file, k8s.yaml. And because I have here extend, I have some really cool templating that I can do here in this Kubernetes YAML file. So I want to say save. I would like you to build a deployment, please. I'm going to call this level up DevOps. And here I'll add a version, or I'm just going to say label. And we'll call this image label. We'll swap this in at runtime here. And double checking. Yep, I did that right. We'll also add that label here. Indent that properly. What is my image? Well, I want this to be my ACR URL, level up DevOps, and that image label. So I'm avoiding putting my secrets in here. Excellent. Now, in this case, I'm going to avoid the resources, but yeah, I know. Kubernetes, you're a little bit mad that I didn't specify those details. That's fine. Here for the container port, I will say the container is going to listen on port 80, and I'm going to set some environment variables. I want to say that the name is ASP.NET Core Environment. The value is production. And I also want to set my database connection string. Now here inside our app settings, we noted that it's connection strings : mydb. So we could set this as connection strings : mydb, but that gets a little bit hairy. And so let's instead use the other convention we can use, which is 2 underscores. And now this value could be server equals whatever, and database is whatever. And so now we can specify our, for example, Azure SQL database here. Okay, we've got our deployment. Oh, the other piece that we need here is the replicas. We'll have 1 in this case. Next up, we want a service. A pod will, our service will load balance across all of the pods. And so let's call this service level up DevOps. Give it the same selectors that we had previously. Here we go. And we'll listen on port 80 and forward to port 80. And we could also say this is of type node port. And that will give us a little bit extra doohickeys if we want. The next thing that we want is an ingress. So let's say ingress here. And this ingress, let's say the name is level up DevOps. The labels, yeah, that works. In this case, we're not going to put the version in the ingress because, well, we just want it to do its thing. Host, we can say this is AKS URL. And that will allow us to do interesting things. We can substitute in this secret. Now, this one will point at the level up DevOps service. And the port here then is port 80. So if any traffic comes in on this host name, it will forward to this level up DevOps service. The level up DevOps service will then target this to port 80 for all of the things that match these selectors. Here's those selectors here. And so it will redirect to all of our pods. In this case, we have 1. Cool. So this is the Kubernetes YAML file that will allow us to be able to launch various details inside of Kubernetes. Now I'm going to reach into my stash and I'm going to grab this Kubernetes YAML file, and let's see if we like this one better. We could also just, start with whatever we had last time and replace that with level up DevOps, and that will get us to what we need. I still got the resources set there, but in this case, I also added a certificate from Let's Encrypt, and that'll be really great. I'm going to use the Nginx ingress here, and we can see that the host is level up DevOps.AKS URL. That's the secret. And so everything else is in place, but we also added an HTTPS to this solution as well. Perfect. So now we've got a Kubernetes YAML file. Let's create one more file. Let's say readme.md. And here in this readme file, we'll just kind of describe the details of our project. So here's some details there. That's the level up DevOps project. The license is MIT. Excellent. So we've done quite a bit here. We created our website. We created a git ignore file to be able to ignore the things that we didn't want to commit to our GitHub repository. We created a Docker ignore file to identify the things we wanted to ignore inside of our Docker image. We created the Dockerfile, our configuration as code of how we wanted to get from that source code into a container. And then we created the Kubernetes YAML file, the details that we need to be able to start our system inside of Kubernetes. Perfect. I think we're ready to commit. let's take a look here. We'll come here into source control, and we'll start looking for exactly those things, the 5 things. Do we have any things that are built files, downloaded files, temp files, user-specific files, or secrets? Oh, hey, here's Bootstrap. We've got a bunch of files here inside of our project. Inside of www root, we have a lib folder that specifies Bootstrap, jQuery, jQuery validation, and these are, well, downloaded files. I think we can swap these with CDN resources instead. Let's come off to CDN.js, and let's take a look at Bootstrap. Bootstrap is a great thing, and if we're using Bootstrap 5, we don't need jQuery, which is really nice. So let's go grab bootstrap.min.css. We'll go grab the link tag. Now, where are we using Bootstrap? Well, let's come back in here. It looks like here in our views in shared, we're using Bootstrap right here. So rather than using our lib version, let's use this version from the CDN. Excellent. If we're not hosting our project on a LAN, this will likely lead to a faster website because, well, we have a different URL for these requests, so it can do it simultaneously. We also have geo-distributed content with CDN.js. So that's the one for Bootstrap. Let's also go grab the details here for both jQuery and Bootstrap. We could come back to CDN.js and find those details. Here's those scripts there. And here the validation scripts, that's where we've got jQuery validation and jQuery validation unobtrusive. Let's go grab those scripts from CDN.js as well. And now, because we're no longer using these files, we can come back in here and we can just delete the entire lib folder. Perfect. Now, as we start to commit stuff, we can see that we have a lot fewer files. We have the files that we care about, but we don't have built files, downloaded files, temp files, user-specific files, or secrets. We're not committing any of those into our source code repository. Let's go double check, make sure we didn't commit some secrets. Let's take a look at our app settings.json. Nope, we didn't put any secrets in there. Excellent. Our app settings development JSON, no secrets there. We're not committing a .env file. This looks pretty good. So let's close all of our files and let's say level up DevOps. Excellent. Yep. Oh, there's no staged files. Let's stage everything. Cool. Now let's commit. Any questions so far on the website that we've built, the Dockerfile, the .gitignore file, the .dockerignore file, or any of the changes that we made to make that happen? Well, if you do find questions, you can definitely tweet me or put them here in chat on YouTube, and we can jump into them whenever you're ready. Excellent. So now that we've got this in place, let's do this. Git push origin main. Cool. So now that we've created our source code, we'll come back here into our repository, and we can now see that our repository has the content. Here's our README file. Excellent. Here's our website, our Kubernetes YAML file, our Docker file, our Dockerignore, our Gitignore file. We've now got our website ready to go. Let's take a look at how we might deploy this into Kubernetes. Now, I said that this repository was pretty much empty, but I did come in here into settings, and I went into secrets, and I created some secrets, new repository secrets. And I could say, for example, we had AKS URL, ACR URL, and then I put the value here. And so now that we've got those secrets in place, we now have our ACR username and password and URL, our AKS URL, and our kube config. We'll be able to use these during the build. Excellent. So now let's come here into GitHub Actions. We could use Jenkins, we could use TeamCity, but GitHub Actions is built into GitHub, and we're not paying for build minutes up until a certain point. So I kind of like this. It's, well, free. Now we can pick from lots of different workflows. Maybe we want to deploy a Node app to Azure or deploy to GKE. We could take a look at security things, scanning with various tools. Continuous integration, maybe we want to build a Haskell website, or some automation, maybe we want to do some things there, or static HTML building with Next.js or Hugo. And there's lots of different things that we can pick from here. We could also start with a completely blank workflow, which is excellent. It used to kind of scaffold a few things here, but now it is all the way blank. So let's come back here and let's take a look for a Docker one. So I'm going to say Docker, and let's see what we can do. Ooh, building a Docker image. That looks interesting. Let's configure that one. Now this will definitely just get us started. We want to definitely customize this in lots of ways. So let's change this to Docker Kubernetes. Cool. So we want to say Docker build and push Kubernetes start. That's the name of our build. Now we want to do this on various branches. Let's do it on the main branch for sure, but let's come back to pull requests. We'll do that later. We also want to create one more, and this is on workflow.
Rich.
Yes.
I think there is a question from Harsha. Do you see it on the screen?
Yes. Where do we specify cert information? Great question. Thank you for that. Here inside of our Kubernetes YAML file, we specified that we would like to get a certificate from Let's Encrypt, and that the URL for that Let's Encrypt certificate will be this. And we're going to store it in this TLS certificate, TLS secret. And so because we've rigged up this to happen automatically, we've also included the details of spinning up the cert manager inside of our cluster. Then that's the details that we need to be able to configure our secret, our certificate. Now we could definitely grab this certificate and stick it in a secret ourselves instead of doing it with Let's Encrypt. But I love that Let's Encrypt is completely free and we can just push that into place. Great question. Thank you for that. Okay, so we've got a build. Workflow dispatch is excellent. Workflow dispatch allows us to be able to push a build button here instead of committing white space. Have you ever not gotten the build to work right, and so you commit another, I don't know, one line change, add a space here, add a carriage return? This workflow dispatch means that we can just push a build button and we don't need to do that. Okay, so our build is going to run on Ubuntu and it's going to do these steps. So our first step is that we want to check out the latest code. Perfect. The next thing is it will run this. So let's say Docker build and push kubectl apply. Now in this case, it's running one command, but I want to run many commands. So let's switch it instead to say run pipe. And now it will run all of these commands. Excellent. So the first command we want to do is to build. I'm going to move the dot here. And of course, the Dockerfile is named Dockerfile, so I can leave that off. And let's call this level up DevOps. Now, I do want to specify the image, the registry URL, and I want to do that from the secret that we created previously. So let's take a look at how we might do that. Okay, so we're here on the GitHub docs, and we talked about creating a secret. And now here's how we use it. $secrets dot that secret name. Okay, so back here in this, we want to tag this as $secret dot ACR URL. Cool. We were able to pull that secret out of the GitHub Actions secret registry and be able to apply it here in this build. The cool part is it's going to mask it in all of our logs. And so we're never going to expose this even on the dashboard. And then also I want to not do it to the date. I'm going to do, say here, github.shop, the git hash. Now, this is definitely not semver, but this is a unique version per build. And the beauty here is that this will set the version inside the image name. And so we'll be able to do some really interesting things like, hey, what version of the source code created this? Well, here's the git hash, and we can exactly match that back to the git hash of the source code that we used. So I really like using the GitHub SHA here. So we did a Docker build. Now let's do a Docker push, and let's push this image into our registry. And well, to be able to push this, we first need to be able to authenticate to that registry. Okay, so how do we authenticate to the registry? Well, let's come over here on the right and take a look at the various marketplace things that we can do. Let's look for Docker login. Ooh, here's a good one made by GitHub Actions. We can take a look at this. We could view the full marketplace listing, and this will tell us all kinds of details about how this action works. Maybe there's a link to the GitHub repository where this action is built, various examples of how to use it. We can see lots of places where we're doing this. Oh, perfect. We'll just set the username and password and it'll log in. Now, we could grab those details, or we can just, let's say, just copy this step right here. We'll want to do it after we do this, and let's just paste that into place. I do need to indent it a little bit differently. There we go. So now we are logging into Docker. Now, what is my registry? We're using AKS, so let's set this to secrets.acr URL. Is it secrets or is it secret? It is secrets. That would have been embarrassing. Secrets. Now, what is the username? Well, great. We have a secret for that as well. Let's set that in place. Secrets.acr username. Name. And what is the password? Well, we've got a secret for that as well. ACR password. And I just got these from the Azure portal where I created my container registry. We don't need ECR, so let's remove that. And then log out. Now, I want to say log out is true. Now, this will log out not at the end of this one step, but at the end of the entire build. Now, if we're on a shared host, this is really important. We're going to clear out the secrets so that we don't get them stuck inside of our agent and possibly used by a subsequent build. In this case, because GitHub Actions is automatically going to destroy the build agent after we finish our build, that's less important, but it's good code hygiene. If ever we move this build to a custom agent, we definitely want to clear the secret after we're done. Cool. So now that we're logged in, now we can Docker push this to our private registry, and it will be able to get up there. Next, we want to do this. kubectl apply-f k8s.yaml. That will apply our Kubernetes YAML file into Kubernetes and start our website. Now, what cluster do we want to look at? Let's come back to our marketplace and let's look for Kubernetes set context. Cool. Kubernetes set context. This one looks great. Let's copy this and we'll set it in place right here. We could definitely take a look at the details of the marketplace listing, but I think this one's good. Now, this is really interesting because it's able to work with lots of different authentication methods. Now, in this case, we're going to use a kubeconfig. I just grabbed my kubeconfig from my user profile directory. Now, what's that kubeconfig? Let's go pull it from our secrets. Secrets.kubeconfig. Perfect. And then we don't need any of the rest of this because, well, we authenticated with a kubeconfig. All of that detail is there. Now we'll log into Kubernetes, and then when we kubectl apply, then it will apply it to our correct cluster. Now there is one more thing we need to do here. We have these secrets that we need to replace. Now, if we had a whole lot of secrets, we might want to use Helm or something a little bit more industrial strength to be able to do this. But in this case, we only have 3 secrets. Let's just set them into place here. So let's go grab this sed command. It's a little bit hairy, so I'll just copy and paste it into place here. Inside of our Kubernetes YAML file, we want to sed without a backup. We want to go find all the instances of ACR URL globally and replace it with our secret. All the instances of AKS URL and replace that with our secret. All the instances of image label and replace that with the GitHub shop. So it'll just replace those details in place. Perfect. Now I've very specifically done it here. If we instead did it here, and if, for example, here in the Docker ignore file, we forgot to say, let's ignore the ks.yaml file because, well, it might contain secrets. If we forgot to do that, and in this case we did, then now those secrets would get pushed into our container. If you were able to pop the container, you would not only have the runtime secrets, you would also have the deployment secrets. So let's not put it here. Let's put it instead here. After we've built and pushed the image, then we'll set the secrets, then we'll set the content in place in Kubernetes. Excellent. So now we've got our Kubernetes, our GitHub Actions DevOps pipeline. When any commit happens on our main branch, or when you push the button, on the latest Ubuntu build image, it will check out all the code, it will log into our Docker private registry, it will log into our Kubernetes cluster, then it will Docker build, running all of the steps in our Dockerfile, and then it will push that to our private registry. It will change the secrets in our Kubernetes YAML file, and it'll apply that to our Kubernetes cluster, starting our website. Cool. So let's commit this. Now, the cool part here is, let's say, create DevOps pipeline, and we'll commit it directly to the main branch. Now, this is just a file inside the .github/workflows folder. If we wanted to come back into that file, we could come in here and we could say edit, and we would get straight back to the marketplace, and we could continue editing this file here. But it's also just a file in our repository. So let's git pull, and we'll pull that file down, and we could continue editing it here inside of VS Code. Now, because we have a file inside the .github/workflows folder, and because we didn't disable it in this case, we do have a build that's running. Cool. So let's come back into GitHub Actions. Oh, it looks like we have a failed build. What did we do? Startup failure. Why do we have a startup failure? I'm going to come back into our build. Let's rerun all jobs and see if we'll get it to start up correctly. And if not, then I'll maybe we have a typo in our YAML file. Okay, so let's assume that we do have a typo in the YAML file. Let me go diff it with the, not that one. Let's diff it with the one that I built last time. GitHub. I'll use beyond compare in this case. And where did we typo things? Open. Okay. That looks good. Oh, secret, not secrets. That's why it's mad. Okay, so let's fix that bug. Glad we found that. Secrets. And I'll come back in here. Oh, we've changed our Docker or our GitHub Actions build. We trimmed some spaces here. We fixed that typo. Any other typos here? Nope, it looks like that's good. And we also added our Kubernetes YAML file to our Docker ignore file. Excellent. Fix typo in build. Let's commit that. And then let's git push origin main and push that up to GitHub. Now, because we have this file here in this directory, it's going to automatically kick off this build. Let's click here to get a look at this build, and we can see that it's going to do all of the steps. Well, of course, it's going to do all of the steps inside of our Dockerfile. Sometimes it takes a minute to notice that, oh, there it goes. Excellent. So it's going to do all of the steps in our Dockerfile. It will pull the base image. It will run our .NET restore, .NET build, .NET test, .NET publish. It'll flip over then to our other image that will get ready our production container. Now, once we've got our production container in place, then it will push that up to our Docker, our private Docker registry, in this case, AKS, and then finally start that in Kubernetes. So it looks like we've got our Dockerfile ready to go. We've pushed that image up to our private container registry. And now let's launch that inside of Kubernetes. And with that, it looks like our build went green. Excellent. So now let's take a look at the content that we have here in our cluster. kubectl, get all, and we can see that now we have that pod, level up DevOps, we have the level up DevOps server, we have, let's take a look at ingress, and we can see that we've got that ingress for this, and none of these secrets got exposed into our build. Now we can come here and let's take a look at this. We'll go to HTTPS, this URL, and it does take a while for this DNS to propagate. And so let's use a shortcut here. Now we can port forward into a particular thing. We could port forward into a pod or into a replica set. Here it is, port forward into a pod, port forward into a deployment, so it'll randomly pick a pod, port forward into a service. Let's do that. We'll just skip the ingress so that we don't need to wait for DNS to propagate, and that'll get us a little bit faster here. So let's come in here and we will say kubectl port forward service / level up DevOps. And we'll go from port 80 on our local machine to port 80 inside the container or inside the service. But maybe I have something else running on port 80 on my local machine. So I'll go from port 8080 on my local machine to port 80 inside the service. Now that we've got that hooked up, we'll come here to localhost port 8080, and we can see the website running that we started. Welcome to our user group. Now, this is really cool. This is our website that we just created running live inside of Kubernetes. That was cool. Now, one of the things that we did was we kind of set aside pull requests. Let's come back to that. The other thing that might be interesting was, let's show a status badge here on our README so that we know if this build is succeeding or failing. So I'm going to come back into our actions and we'll take a look at our particular build, and let's create a status badge. Now, this is just the YAML that we would need to put on our README page to show our status badge. So inside here, inside of our readme.md, let's put that status badge, say, there. Cool. If the build succeeds, then it will show a green label. If it fails, it'll show a red label. That'll be great. Next up, let's take a look at pull requests. Now, right now we have a build that does all of these steps, and some of them make sense for pull requests and some of them don't. I could definitely say if branch name is main and only do this on particular branches. In this case, our pull request build is going to be significantly different. So let's just copy this file and create a brand new build, docker pr.yaml. Cool. So now here with this YAML file, I'm going to say docker build a PR. I want to do it on all of the branches that are not main. And I also want to do it on pull request on all branches. Now, why do I have two? This one I want to do for all of the internal contributors. They'll probably create a different branch. Maybe it's a feature branch, maybe it's a hotfix branch, but it'll be in the same repository. So I want to kick off the build for internal contributors. I also want to kick off this build for external contributors because they'll probably fork this repository into their GitHub account and then create a pull request that way. So now I've got internal contributors and external contributors that can kick off this build. So what are the things that I want to do? Well, I definitely don't want to start this website inside of Kubernetes. So let's delete that line. Because we're not starting the website, we can probably also delete the secrets here. We don't need to set the secrets in our Kubernetes YAML file if we're not going to do it. We also don't need to log into Kubernetes. We're not pushing to Kubernetes. And to that end, I don't even want to push my image up to my private container registry because, well, I don't want to accidentally later take a pull request build and push it into production. Let's definitely not do that. Which means I don't even need to log into Docker here. To that end, let's eliminate all of the use of the secrets here. I'll just say level up DevOps-PR. Cool. Now it's still going to run all of the steps inside of our Dockerfile. So we'll still be able to pull all of our NuGet packages, build, run all of our unit tests, publish, create a different image, setting those environment variables. And if we wanted to do more integration tests, we could do that just launching this image in interesting ways. But we're not deploying it to Azure. We're only building this locally. Once we succeed with all of our build succeeds and all of our unit tests passing, then we've got a complete build. Cool, so now we've got our PR build. Let's come back in here and let's commit those things. We've added a status backend. We've also added our PR build. And so let's say PR build and status badge. And let's commit that. Now we're here and we said Docker, nope, we said git push. And we could definitely do that here, but let's instead do that here inside of VS Code. Let's push this content into our GitHub repository. Close all. And because we changed a file inside the main branch, in this case, we changed our status badge and PR build, then it's going to kick off another build. Last time we went in this way. This time, let's go in this way instead. Let's click on Actions, and we can see our various builds. We could choose to filter by a particular build. And then let's open up that build. Now, we only have one stage in this build. It's called build, so let's open up that. And now we can see all the steps in our build. It already logged into Docker. It already logged into Kubernetes. And so now it's doing all of the steps inside of our Dockerfile. Great. Restoring our NuGet packages, and then it'll run a build. Let's see if our build succeeds. Do we have any build failures? Nope, our build succeeded. Let's run all of our tests. We don't have any tests, so we don't have any failing tests. So that succeeded. Let's publish. That publish worked great. We'll flip over into our other image. Now we're doing our production image. We'll push that up to our private container registry. And then we will, back in our GitHub Actions build, we will apply that into our Kubernetes cluster, and we can see that that succeeded. Great. So now back here, we can see that we have our passing build. That's excellent. But now the magic question is, well, what version of our software is inside of our cluster? Let's say git log, one line. And we can see the latest commit is 6AD0C. Now, one of the things that we did here is we very specifically said we would like to set our labels here on our container. So we have that image label here. And in our build, we changed that image label to be the GitHub SHA. So let's take a look at the labels that we have here. kubectl get all ing. And now we can see here's the pod that we have, Level Up DevOps pod. And so let's describe that pod. kubectl describe that pod. And we can see the various details. Oh, look, it pulled that image from our private container registry. That's excellent. But scrolling up to the labels, here's our label. The app is Level Up DevOps. We could also include other things like our department or our project. But here's the version, 6AD0C3C. And 6AD0C3C is the latest version of our software. We know that that deployment succeeded because we know the image that's running is that correct version. Excellent. So we were able to build our application. We scaffolded out a website. We built a git ignore file. We built a Docker ignore file. We talked about best practices inside of our Dockerfile to leverage Docker caching and avoid pushing secrets into place. And now all of this is here in this repository that you can get to right now. The URL of this repository is github.com/robrich/levelupdevops GitHub Actions Kubernetes. You can see that here on my screen right now. Or if it's easier to get to it, you can head off to robrich.org/presentations. And robrich.org/presentations, here's Level Up Your DevOps with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes. And that will get you straight to the GitHub repository as well. It was fun to be able to show you how to take a website, build a DevOps pipeline, keep our secrets safe, and deploy that into Kubernetes in one show. I'd love for you to grab this source code up here on GitHub, fork that into your own repository and continue building on it, or use it in your own project and start to leverage the skills here. We built a build in an hour. I definitely bet you can build here on GitHub Actions or in Jenkins or TeamCity in a day or two. Start easy, get yourself to an automated place, and you can build an automated system too. This was a lot of fun getting to share with you Level Up Your DevOps with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes. Any questions that we haven't answered yet? Any thoughts? Ooh, I see one. Can you explain how to add SAST, SonarQube, or similar, and where will the scan run? Great question, Nick. Excellent. There's two places that we could look at this. The one is we could add them here inside of our GitHub Actions build. We could say sonar scan here, or we might even say Docker scan if we want to scan our registry. And that's one way to go. We could definitely do it outside of our container. The other way that we might choose to do it is here inside of our container. We ran our tests here. We might also want to run sonar scan here and execute the details. It all depends on the needs that you have. If the scan takes a really long time, then maybe this isn't the best place to do it. Maybe you want to push that into your registry and do more additional tests here. But I agree, let's leverage more tests. Maybe here we also kick off distributed tests. Distributed tests. So let's start these up on a site that will allow us to be able to launch our entire environment and validate that it works there. And if it works, then we'll kubectl apply it in our cluster. But if the distributed tests don't work, then we can stop here. We've still built our image, but we haven't yet launched it in production. Great question. Can we integrate application insights telemetry to track the deployment log and errors? Yes. Our first stop in integrating application insights is we probably want to grab the application insights GitHub, NuGet package. We'll want to set that in place in our app. And then we'll need to set our token. And so our token is likely in here, application insights, and we might have some details here. Now, much like we did with our previous setting, so let's say token, let's say use user secrets. Don't put these secrets in our config file. And now that we've got that mocked out here, let's come back into our Dockerfile, and we could specify that as another environment variable. And we could include the connection strings, default connection. In this case, we'll just leave it blank. But we could also include env application insights token, set a default here. And then as we start this up inside of Kubernetes, let's also add that secret here as well. Oh, it looks like we removed our connection strings my DB. And maybe it pulls from a secret, or maybe we've specified the details. So let's also specify that here. I want this to be application insights token, and maybe the value is just right here. App insights token. And now, because we've specified this as another thing that we want to change, let's come back into our Docker build here, and we'll say, oh, and by the way, I also want to change this one, S app insights, to secrets dot app insights, and I want to do that globally. And now I've been able to set that insight. I might that token. I might choose to do this inside of Kubernetes secret instead. But that's how I get my application insights into my application, so that as my application starts up, now I'm monitoring all of the details. So then inside of my app, I may choose to say, well, on startup, logger.log and be able to dig into the details here. So how might we mention that this was a deployment? We could also, for example, console log, well, actually in this case, it's bash echo built, and we'll send that off to application insights. And so we can do a similar thing here. If you wanted to be able to track the specifics of the deployment, then this might be a way to go. But I generally say, hey, let me just log when my application starts up. And so I actually just do it here. Great question. Application insights, or open telemetry, or any logging mechanism is definitely something that you want to leverage to be able to get your application logged in a really elegant way. Thanks for that question. Thank you for a great session. Very useful. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Most of the time, these are marketplace plugins you can bring in. I've done those with success after the build, but before deployment, so you can react to bad things from the scan. Yes, excellent idea. Here in our build, we basically just wrote a bash script here, but you could definitely reach into the marketplace and grab plugins this way too. So maybe we want to break this into two pieces. And so we'll say, well, this is the Docker build and push, and then this is the kubectl apply. And so we'll do these parts here, and we'll do these parts here. And then we want to then also add more steps from marketplace. And the cool part about this is, because this is just a file inside of our repository, pop open into that directory and click on that file. You can then click on edit, and you're right back in that spot where you can start to search the marketplace for things and use it that way. Now, I tend to prefer to just call the command lines rather than using these GitHub Actions tasks, but either is definitely fine. And if you would rather use a GitHub Actions task here, then you definitely can. Copy this, set it in place where you need it, and it can do great things. I'm so
Thank you
glad
very
that I
much.
could share this with you. This was so amazing. Thank you for coming.
Yep. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Rob. I really appreciate your time taking and doing this session. It's been really helpful. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you in the next time. Thank you.